Okay, hello, welcome back to the Doomer Optimism podcast. I am here today with Grayson Quay. Grayson and I have been in long time mutual communication, but have not been on the podcast together yet. So I'm excited to have you here. Grayson just wrote a book called The Transhumanist Temptation. Is that right?
You got it.
Okay. And it is excellent, unbelievable, and there's so few of us on this totally anti-transhumanist team. I need you to have you on and talk about your book. So, welcome. I'll first have you just sort of introduce yourself and maybe give a brief overview of the book, and then we can get into some detailed questions about it.
Yeah, so I've been a freelance writer since about 2016, and I never really established kind of a beat per se. There was never like one issue I wrote about. I was always interested in all these different things like bioethical issues and technology and kind of questions around liberalism and capitalism and the long-term kind of projected trends of those, and then kind of reenchantment and like esoteric religious stuff. And one day I kind of had this lightning bolt, and it was actually thanks to a default friend, Catherine D, who I think you've had on the show.
Yeah.
But she tweeted something just kind of offhand about how, she thought that transhumanism was going to be a big dividing line for people moving forward. And as I thought more about that, I kind of realized that that was the one thing that was tying together all of those disparate interests I had. And as soon as I realized that, I was like, okay, I need to write this book. And so the book is divided into those 5 sections. It basically explores how kind of a transhumanist mindset, it sort of looks beyond just sort of particular technologies as examples of transhumanism and tries to conceive of it as a way of looking at ourselves and the world around us that affects everything. So the 5 sections deal with how it affects how we view our bodies, external reality, politics, work or economics, and then God and religion.
Yeah. This is so good. And I really like that you broke it up thematically with these different sections because I feel like on this podcast we talk basically about all of these similar things and these kind of topic areas. Like we've talked a lot about almost like questions of family and women's issues through the lens of transhumanism and bodies, like, not only plastic surgery, but, trans stuff and hormones, and not just hormones, but also like pharmaceuticals, as like a transhumanist technology, or everyone sort of like being on drugs basically at all times. Reality, just our sense of reality. Like I was just Joe Allen is a fellow traveler, and you two need to meet each other. I realized this after reading your book. But he was just tweeting about people training AI to embody their dead son and then talking to
Oh,
it.
yeah, did you see this Jim Acosta on
Yes.
yeah, he interviewed an AI construct of one of the kids who died in the Parkland shooting in 2018.
Yes, yes, and I just saw that yesterday, and I was like, I knew that this was going to go there. So we'll come back to that, but that's like a perfect example that just came out yesterday. That's like terrifying. Politics, work, and then you end with God, which is really interesting, and we're going to get to that too. We'll do as much doom as we can get in an hour, and then we'll go to the optimism. Okay, so in the beginning, you were trying to define transhumanism and like kind of doing some interesting rhetorical things because like I guess this problem is as old as humanity and civilization. So we can just start with that. Like, what kind of argument are you making? Like, transhumanism isn't something that came about in 2024 with AI. It's something that's a longer struggle that humanity's been facing since the beginning. So why don't we start with that?
Yeah, so I think that, yeah, so Julian Huxley coins the term transhumanism in its modern sense in, I think, 1957. Um, he's a kind of British eugenicist type. He's a brother of Aldous Huxley. Um, and his definition is basically that humanity or mankind has kind of been appointed as the managing director of human evolution, without
Hmm.
even necessarily asking for the job. The obligation's just been thrown upon us. But I think if you look further back, the roots of transhumanism are a little deeper. They're in what I would say is just like a rejection of any idea of natural law. So I come at it a few different ways in the book. There's Charles Taylor, who's a Canadian philosopher, has some good terms that you can use, which are poiesis and mimesis. So like making versus mimicry, I guess you would say in English. But the mimesis would be there's some kind of transcendent order. There's some kind of cosmic structure to things, and the good life or happiness lies in conforming yourself to that in some way. And then poiesis is kind of this existentialist view that you could draw from Sartre or other thinkers and say that, like, no, for humanity, existence precedes essence, right? Like we are just sort of thrown into the world as products of blind evolutionary forces. The fact that we are the kind of being we are doesn't have any ought attached to it. Um, and so that's where the poiesis sides comes in, right? It's just the meaning of life is just to give your life a meaning. You decide what a good human being is. You decide what a human being is in general.
Right. Well, and just
You're
ultimate freedom. There's no real bounds. There's no like nothing tethered in terms of what is good. It's just sort of like, independently, you're sort of making this up based on, I guess, like drives, evolutionary drives, or something as an animal versus like maybe this higher natural law putting bounds on
yeah,
what is good.
yeah, man is just the being that defines itself. And yeah, I mean, even if you were to reduce it down to evolutionary drives and say like, oh, well, we should fulfill these drives, it's like, well, why?
Right.
Um, and I don't think anyone would say you should fulfill all of them because some of them are incredibly socially destructive. So you have, I've seen people say kind of just totally uncritically, like unself-reflectively, like, oh, we should, try to emphasize sort of the higher evolutionary drives and suppress the lower ones. And you're already importing a hierarchy there that's not
Right.
implicit in
And
what
who is
those drives.
determining what's
Yeah,
higher and
exactly.
lower? Right. Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
so yeah, this is kind of what C.S. Lewis warns about on The Abolition of Man, is if you throw out any standard of natural law, you're just left with whims or preferences. Which ironically is kind of what they claim that any standard is just you're trying to impose your preference on me. And, in the book, I take the position that, like, no, I think we can know things about what human flourishing looks like. That's kind of been the majority opinion throughout history. If you go back through the classical tradition with Plato and Aristotle, and then up through St. Thomas Aquinas, who's drawing on that and on obviously the scriptures and kind of synthesizing those. This was kind of understood the whole way through. And even in the United States with the American founding, like, there's this idea now that being an American just sort of means being a relativist and maximizing individual autonomy for everyone. And if you look back at like the founding documents, like these guys all believed in natural law. Um, in fact, that was like how they justified the whole project. If there's no natural law, the idea of the whole Declaration of Independence, the whole American experiment makes no sense at all, unless you believe in some idea of natural law, some kind of Aristotelian or Thomistic idea there. So
I want to come. I want to come back and have you define, or maybe not define, but explain natural law and like what that's based in. But first, I want to read a little part of this. One paragraph contains so much in it that I have to just say it. And I think this is so spot on. And also, so part of it is about all these different isms that came in the past, like modern centuries. But I like to couch this in your larger point that this is a sort of, I don't know, all of this is built on previous kinds of, I don't know, challenges that humanities have faced throughout civilization, and that like this sort of thing just, I think, accelerated in the modern era through various. And my whole perspective is that these things got accelerated in the modern era due to this, like, just abundant energy that then allowed for this development of this accelerating technology. But all of the core of a lot of these issues, like these drives that push forward, I don't know, different ways people want to act, but then we're limited for various reasons throughout civilizational history. Anyways, in the modern era, here the various isms of centuries past often carried the seeds of transhumanist ideology. You said it in a more pithy way than I did. Gnosticism, with its vision of the soul as the true self and the body as a meat prison. Romanticism, with its glorification of the Promethean and Luciferian impulse. Now, romanticism, I gotta come back to this because I'm like, there's some good there. I don't know. Liberalism, with its focus on rights, the rights-bearing individual, and supposed neutrality on questions of the ultimate good. Capitalism, with its laissez-faire attitude toward free exchange and its tendency to commodify everything. Progressivism, with its belief that newer is always better. Darwinism, with its substitution of evolutionary flux for stable identity. It goes on. Freudianism, feminism, scientism. It's incredible how much all of these ideologies, even when we're sometimes viewed as in opposition to one another, are all putting forward this versions of transhumanism.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, it's funny. I mean, even if you just look at one of the kind of core oppositions of the last century or so of like Marxism versus capitalism, I guess, like both of these have very strong transhumanizing tendencies. Like the Soviet Union was very focused on producing this new Soviet man,
Right,
where they really believed they could remake human nature
right.
some way. And then, obviously on the capitalist side, I draw on Christopher Lasch a lot for some of this in the book, but it really comes about with this kind of in Adam Smith and other thinkers early on with this idea that human wants are potentially insatiable and that can be sort of an engine for driving infinite economic growth and rising living standards.
Right.
Um, but that sort of implicitly just implies that you're going to blow past every limit that you could possibly have, and that eventually, as technology advances, kind of our own bodies, our own minds, our own genetic codes can become commodified in this way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's, it's really heads transhumanism, tails transhumanism in many cases.
I know, and this, I mean, it's really like the whole hypothesis is that like there shouldn't be limits. I mean, it's basically like we should be able to evolve or direct our evolution toward whichever end here, whether it's like feminism or capitalism or like a industrial Marxism. That one way or another, like we should be able to throw off the chains of these natural limits, and we should be able to like remake our society in whichever direction we want. And this is why I said at the beginning, like there's so few of us, which is like, no matter who gets elected president, there's like pretty much the majority are going to be some form of like technophile, techno optimist, somewhat, even if transhumanist light, they'll be, somewhat in that direction. We're a very small minority, and we're like, have been throughout, I would say, the development of modernity too, which is like people like the Luddites. I mean, people always make fun of them, but it's like people who are like raising this red flag of like, maybe there's some risks associated with this. Maybe if you take this to its logical conclusion, we'll lose many things that we developed over the course of civilization by exercising restraint and limits.
Yeah, I try to take pains in the book to make it clear that I'm not against technology, which no matter how, like,
No, I know. No matter how many times you say it, they're
yeah,
like,
it's
"You
like,
want us to live in a cave?"
yeah, all the comments are like, oh, so we can't sharpen sticks, we have to just throw rocks, right? Um, but I think that the problem is with a lot of these technologies is that many of them would have some incredibly useful applications. We're just not in a position where we have the philosophical resources to draw the lines that need to be drawn.
Yeah,
So one of the examples I give is artificial wombs, where like this could be a really wonderful technology if, a woman goes into labor before the child's reached the point of viability, and it's a question of choosing between delivering the child and having it die or potentially having the mother die. In any case, even like the most stalwart pro-lifer would say like deliver the child.
yeah,
But if artificial wombs existed in some form, you could kind of continue gestating that child externally to the point of viability, and then mother and child would both live. Um, there have actually been some feminist arguments made against artificial wombs on these grounds because it would weaken the argument for abortion rights, interestingly.
Oh
Is
God.
very dark. Just kind of it confirms that it's not about, expelling the intruder per se. It really is about killing the child and avoiding
Yeah.
parenthood. But, so much to say, like um we don't have a standard of human flourishing or of natural law that would allow us to draw that line. So if we actually developed artificial wombs, the way they would actually be used is instead of saving children's lives in emergency situations, you would very quickly have, wealthy women just incubating all of their children in these big warehouses. And, that would become an equity issue where you had, poor women getting preeclampsia and gestational diabetes while rich women pounded mimosas while they FaceTimed their fetus uh, at brunch. And then, so of course, they'd have to be, covered by insurance. That would be mandated and subsidized. And now suddenly we're a whole different species that reproduces in a completely different way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I know I said
Let's talk.
natural law there, so I wanted to like go back and
Yeah,
prove that.
yeah, let's go back to natural law and
Yeah.
talk a little bit about like what is the basis for that? And I know you talked about both like ancient philosopher basis for it and a Christian basis. And so maybe we could talk a little bit about both.
Yeah, so I kind of have two arguments against transhumanism. One that I like and one that I don't like as much, but that I give anyway. Um, so one is this natural law argument. So you can, kind of trace one fount of it from the Old Testament where Proverbs talks about wisdom, right? And wisdom is said to have been present at creation and kind of woven into all of creation. This is often kind of identified with the divine logos if we want to get really deep into the theology of it. But basically, this word that's used for wisdom is chokmah in Hebrew. I got to do the throat thing, but it means something like skill or craft. So the word's used for wisdom, but it's also used for like craftsmen who build the tabernacle in Exodus, who are really good at embroidery or stone carving. So the fact that it's the same word suggests that the same way there's an art to carving stone well or embroidering well, there's an art to living well, to being a good human being. And then Plato and Aristotle kind of say the same thing, where Plato will say, well, there's a knife that you're using to dress vines. A good one is one that cuts the vines well. And then, Aristotle will say a good cobbler is one that makes good shoes, but what's a good man? Um, so while you can figure out what a good knife is or what a good pair of shoes are by saying, well, what do we use this for? What is it for? And is it performing that well? And the way you figure out what it's for is what is distinctive about it. And so for humanity, what's distinctive about us is our use of reason, and that enables us to kind of tame our passions and pursue virtues and all these other things. And then we're also just the kind of embodied being we are. So that gives us some insight into how we ought to live in order to achieve flourishing. So this is the idea that there's a human nature, there's a proper end or goal, or telos for in Greek, to which we should orient ourselves. And that leads you to flourishing or eudaimonia, and specifically to a type of flourishing that's proper to the type of being that you are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that to depart from that, to aim your desires somewhere other than at your telos or at your proper flourishing, is going to damage you in some way, is going to um, make you less happy and take away from your flourishing. So that's my primary argument. And you can, obviously, St. Thomas Aquinas picks that up and sort of grounds it in Christianity and everything. My secondary argument is just even if you don't believe in any kind of natural law, if you don't believe that God created us to be the kinds of things we are, if you don't believe that as embodied humans, we share a nature with the incarnate God, and that there's real value in that, and that kind of our human embodied existence, flawed as it may be, is the vehicle through which we're meant to achieve salvation. If you don't believe any of that, the best argument I can give you against transhumanism is to stick with humanity because it works well enough, and because the people who are offering you something better don't know what they're doing and probably don't have your best interests at heart, and you will not be the one controlling the technologies that are going to be used to transform you in this way.
Right. So even like, yeah, I mean, I think both of those arguments are great. I mean, on the one hand, I don't even think you necessarily need to have a Christian ethos to still agree with the ancient Plato and Aristotle argument
Right.
that there's a way to live well, and living well is a craft, and there's like a sort of and true good and truth that you're like, and beauty that you're sort of seeking in the process of being a human in the world. I think, even if you wanted to have a secular argument, you could point to those. I know you will get to the Christian argument too.
Yeah, there's definitely a more secular natural law tradition.
Yeah, and then the other, like, it's very utilitarian in nature, which is sort of like all of us have seen versions of this where like people who have a profit incentive um get a hold of something that then takes control over our lives without um our best interest at heart, and don't ask for our permission whatsoever, and just sort of push these things onto us, which we then have to be forced to do and then get punished for not partaking in. Like all of us have experienced that in modern life. I mean, look at the COVID experience. It was like, these kinds of things where, the bureaucrats and those with a incentive to make money collude to determine the trajectory of your life. And like, how do you not see that even in a utilitarian sense as something that's quite risky to put in the hands of somebody to have control over you?
Yeah, like one example I give is from the transhumanist side, it's always sort of framed in this very simplistic way of like, oh, well, we'll just make everyone smarter and stronger and happier, and isn't
Like
that
according to who?
obvious?
According to
But
who? I mean, yeah.
I'm like, okay, even conceding that there's, maybe certain traits like intelligence that, would kind of be considered uncontroversially beneficial. Like, what about all the other things that are very clearly like culturally conditioned? That beauty standards like wide or narrow hips are in. And, if you reduce your children to products that you kind of custom order in this way, um, and how crazy could this get, right? Dragon scales or something, I don't know. But
Right. No, I
and
know. I
then
mean,
those
and
kids grow up knowing that they're products of this kind of fad. It's like parents that named their kids after Daenerys Targaryen before she lost her mind and like burned down an entire city with 2 million people in it or whatever, and now they're just
yeah,
stuck with that name.
yeah.
um it's like you could be stuck literally with the physical characteristics and the personality that was considered kind of trendy or in when your parents were I was going to say when your mother was carrying you, when you were off in your pod in the warehouse, right? But you're stuck with those. And I mean, maybe you're not stuck with those because maybe you have options to technologically or pharmaceutically alter your personality and your physical characteristics later in life. But this makes it truly impossible to develop any kind of stable identity. Like you think like we have bad kind of adolescent identity crises now. Like just imagine this, you're just screaming into the void like, who am I, who am I, who am I? And the answer is just whatever you want to be. Here, buy this new face or this new body or this new personality or whatever. Yeah, it's
Yeah, and just yeah, and
terrifying world.
by the yeah, right. And with this subscription service, you can keep your face or whatever, you can keep up with it. We had this guy, Jeff Stein, who's a lawyer, come and talk about the basically reproductive technology and basically what it's trying to do with the law as currently constituted. And his whole argument was from a legal perspective, and like a lot of our laws are based on this idea that we've all decided together that these are the limits, these are the definitions of things. And he was saying, like the definition of a family, the definition of a parent is getting upended here with these new laws, because they're basically taking away any kind of like natural tie between child and parent, which then has a whole sort of slippery slope legal implications in terms of like parental rights, or the ability of the state to take away kids, because, well, we've redefined a parent. You're not really the parent of your child. That's a sort of a slippery and malleable thing. And just to accommodate these sort of edge cases that are happen only because of technology. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a really strong argument as well. Just like we have this legal basis and these legal definitions of things for a reason.
Yeah, interestingly, one of the examples I cite in my book is a uh, couple that got divorced and had some frozen embryos, and the kind of legal question was, is this a property dispute or a child custody dispute? And the judge rules it's a property dispute, and the lawyer for one side came back and said, well, these are humans. And he said, well, there's precedent for treating humans as chattels. It's called slavery.
Oh
Like
my
that was the
God.
judge's argument. Like he
Oh
was
my
ruling on
God.
slavery.
My God. Okay. Yeah, well, I want to say one more thing on natural law. You have a quote in in here. Um, so, liberal, capitalist, I guess, society is the whole ethos is just sort of like expanding your autonomy, your ability to act. There's no like sort of the idea is that you should never have any limitations on this ability to act in any direction you want. And so you said the modern natural law theorist John Finnis argued that certain basic goods are accessible through human reason, and that law and society must safeguard those goods and mediate between them when they conflict. He identified seven: life, knowledge, play, aesthetic experience, friendship, practical reasonableness, and religion, to which he later added marriage. Liberal capitalist society acknowledges only two such goods: individual freedom and GDP growth. And like the way that you say this, it's crazy because that sounds to me like the argument that really drew me toward environmentalism when I was drawn towards it, which is there are these really beautiful things in the world, our ecologies, and they're good in and of themselves. Their functioning is good. Them being destroyed in some way is bad. And so the idea that the alternative to that was like, well, we should have no limitations on our freedom and we should have no limitations on how much we can grow GDP. That was the enemy of that, of environmentalism. And I think that's what draws a lot of people or drew a lot of people like disaffected environmentalists to doomer optimism, because it was like environmentalism then turned into like this crazy corporate, technophilic, whatever monster. But truly what we're interested in is like this, the I guess the aesthetic experience of nature being a good and beautiful thing in and of itself, and functioning ecologies being good. Like I've had arguments with people online where it's like, well, why is pollution bad? And I'm like, I don't even know how to start. Like, I don't even, I don't even know how to.
We're just gonna make robot bees and fix it all, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, anything else on this natural law topic you want to touch on before we move on?
Yeah, so it's interesting. You mentioned kind of the environmentalist movement. Like it is, if you want to try and be, I think, a consistent anti-transhumanist, then yeah, like part of it is, I think, opposing certain technologies outright, trying to impose some idea of natural law or of human nature, some kind of teleological view of how we're employing these technologies in other cases, right? I think that certain things should be used as tools and not just integrated into everyday experiences as general purpose technologies, right? If a construction worker can get a pair of, robot arms on his back and pick up big heavy girders, and that'd be great for the construction site. I don't want him to like go home and move through life as like an eight-armed transhuman cyborg.
Right.
Or like augmented reality lenses or something would be really handy for doctors who want to have patient information floating above their beds or something. But I don't want that guy to then like go home and be, playing Tetris with his mind while his kids are trying to talk to him or something.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but I think you also have to really take a step back from particular technologies and say, well, what is it about our political and economic structures that's leading us to use our technology in this way? Like what ideas are animating those structures that we have in society? And I don't really think it's a good enough answer to just say like, oh, well, the systems are fine. We just have to, be very intentional about how we use this technology. Like I think there's a structural issue here where we do have a political system that's leading toward ever more individual autonomy that gives us no guardrails for how to use these technologies, kind of in the late liberal, the kind of the degenerated liberalism we have now. And then, in capitalism, it's really focused on, like I said, just this increasing expansion and then satisfaction and then further expansion of more and more human wants that gradually encompasses and encloses more and more aspects of human society. Like the I've gotten one review of the book written so far, like in a publication. I've got a few on Amazon, but it was from this kind of free market, right, this kind of right libertarian organization. And of course, like, it was exactly what I was saying. Like, oh yeah, I totally agree with all this stuff about abortion and IVF and artificial wombs and the dangers of AI and virtual reality and all these other things. But like, you can't blame capitalism and liberalism for this. That's not fair. Like, that's just freedom. It's the question is how we use it. And I'm like, oh, no. That's
Well, and as if the solution is just like universal basic libertarianism, which is that like we all as individuals just need to determine for ourselves at all times what is good and what is safe and like what risks we're willing to take. But like, well, like you said, in a lot of cases, as these technologies get advanced and as there are no societal guardrails, those choices get taken away from you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's part of it is just the kind of atomizing effect that these structures have, which is where over time it erodes any of the kind of intermediate institutions, the church and the extended family and the neighborhood and all these other things, where people might come together to make intentional choices about how they're going to use technology and kind of impose rules on themselves. This, basically doesn't exist anymore. Obviously, the Catholic Church has bioethical teachings, but in most cases, you're not going to get anything like that at all. And you're even in, the Catholic Church where there's bioethical teachings, there's certainly no restrictions on how you're using your smartphone or chat GPT or whatever else. So the ability to form these communities is really handicapped by the structures that we live in. And then once you're atomized, once it's, you and your nuclear family versus the smartest, best paid people at the largest companies in the world in Silicon Valley that are spending all day developing apps and devices that are designed to addict you.
Yeah,
It's asymmetrical warfare. Like,
I know.
it's
Yeah,
it's deeply unfair to say, like, after you and your spouse get done with a long day of work, your job is now to kind of control technology in your home in this way. Like, I know plenty of people who have managed to do this and are like really fighting the good fight, but I don't think it's a fair burden to put on people.
no, I
I
mean,
have a long section in the book about where I look at the current state of attempts to ban minors from social media and from smartphone use as well, and come to the conclusion of like, no, this libertarian idea that like, oh, the state shouldn't tell you how to parent is ridiculous. Like, I actually do want the state to put its thumb on the scale in favor of a more authentic vision of human flourishing.
well, and it's not like telling parents how to parent, it's telling corporations that they should have limits on addictive technologies for
Yeah.
children. That's not the same thing. Like, you know what I mean? It's like it's actually you should be putting limits on the corporations that have these obviously addicting and in some ways like entrapping technologies. Like Matt Crawford was just on Substack yesterday saying how he's trying to use Microsoft Word and they have this required AI like buddy who that is then like reading his essays and giving him suggestions. And he said one of them said it was I don't know, like an example of white privilege or something, and he was like referring to leprosy or so. I don't know, it was like he was like, you said the word leprosy and therefore, and was like, well, I don't know how to turn this thing off, it's being forced on me, like nobody asked for this and it's getting forced onto people. Like it's one of those things where like, yeah, I mean, we're not asking to limit your freedom, but we can to some extent put some guardrails on what these corporations are forcing onto people.
Yeah, I mean, and these things are very bare bones. Like, these laws like mostly allow parents to override them or just require some kind of age verification or something like that. It's
Right.
like, it's just very transparent that the, libertarian think tanks that are pushing back against these laws are just solely motivated by the checks that big tech writes them.
Yes.
Like, it's they're very much in search of, it's a conclusion in search of arguments,
Yes,
for
totally.
sure.
Yes.
But I don't think, I think that it's crazy to like think that our society needs to be built on this idea that like, oh, whether a child, grows up playing outside and loving his parents and siblings and playing with them and talking to them and living, having a healthy childhood as a, embodied being in a particular place with particular people, uh, that there's no difference qualitatively between that and a child who grows up having their attention span and dopamine system strip mined by Silicon Valley for profit and exists everywhere and nowhere, scrolls through their phone every second of the day, and develops all the mental health disorders and other kind of dysfunctions that we've seen are just undeniably linked to the widespread use of smartphones and social media.
Yeah, totally. So, okay.
Yeah, these are just, these are just equally valid choices that one might make, and it's
Well, I know. So I have two things to say. First is one thing I constantly get pushback online about is, of course, I'm making these decisions. I'm having to make these decisions for my family as my kids are getting older, even as when they were babies, about what kind of parent I want it to be and what those choices mean for their mental and physical health. And so, like, my orientation has always been toward, like, especially for infants. Like, infants are not evolved in the modern world. They don't know, like, they don't know that they're in the modern world when they're born. They're evolved, like, they're born as a baby, as like a biological creature, with certain needs. And so I say these things like babies have these certain needs, they need to be met. Like, if we want to make sure that they're healthy and thriving, they have to think about their biology and think about the things that they need to have met. And people just get so mad at me, and it's like, well, the proof is in the pudding. Like, we have these widespread kids with like anxiety disorders and ADHD and like eczema, and they can't breathe, and they're like on, they're on these various nebulizers, and it's like, do we like, is that what we're shooting for? This like sickly generation, and you're just going to sort of explain that away, that like, oh, it's just all this modern stuff. So I think to some extent, I do say, like, okay, in absence of anyone coming in from the state solving these things for us, we can at least try to shoot for a North Star of like what would be the healthiest possible thing. And people get really mad at me about that, and they think like the afflictions are sort of like external to them and not a result of any of their choices. So I'm like, I'm on both sides with that. Like, my sociological side is like, yeah, it's structures, but then my like, I don't know, I actually have to live in the world side, parent side says like, okay, well, all those structures exist, but there are things we can do, and people get very mad about that. Another thing I just want to say was going back to like being the one who has to make all these decisions. Something that got me really frustrated early on in my parenting, and in some ways is still constantly an issue, is, and I think this radicalizes a lot of people. You start to look at like this is like a parallel as industrial agriculture. You start to look at the ingredients in things, and this is a kind of like unfettered capitalist, industrial expansion of agriculture and like food processing and additives and all of this stuff without asking, any of the populace if this is what we want or if it's safe for us. And you're looking at things, and it's like you have to be a chemist to figure out what's healthy in the store. And you're like looking at all of these ingredients, and then you have this reactionary health nut people who then are like, I'm only going to eat like raw foods or only organic foods, which you can absolutely do, but it's just one of those frustrating things, like the amount you have to navigate to handle these things when it would be quite easy to do like what they do in Europe, which is the precautionary principle. If it hasn't been proven safe, then it's not allowed. If the onus is on you, the corporation, to determine whether or not something is safe. And then otherwise it doesn't get allowed. It's a pretty simple rule to follow.
Yeah, I think just in general, like with regard to kind of a lot of the technologies I write about, yeah, there is this tendency to put all the onus kind of on the individual. And the result of that is going to be just kind of going with the flow and adopting, each new technology as it comes out. There's not really any social structure in which you can make those decisions. I mean, the conclusion of my book, I talk about this science fiction novel called The Diamond Age that I really love, where it takes place in sort of this anarcho-capitalist future where there's kind of a bare bones law code that everyone sort of signs on to, so that they can engage in commerce with one another. But what makes up society are basically these kind of tribes or philes is the term, Phyles, and they can be based on ethnicity or ideology or religion or anything else. And they're these kind of voluntary societies that aren't necessarily geographically based. They tend to be kind of dispersed around the world and have little enclaves around all the major cities as kind of neighborhoods that have big, nanotech defenses around them to keep other groups out. But these groups all make intentional decisions about how they're going to use technology to advance their group's values and preserve their group's values in much the way that the Amish do. Like, I was talking to somebody, and it's not as if the Amish have a year cutoff where they say we're not going to use technology at
No,
this
right.
point. Like, they evaluate technologies on a case by case basis on the question of how does this serve our community and how does this help us serve God. Um, and based on those criteria, they make those decisions. And it's the same thing in this novel. And different groups come to different conclusions, right? There's this group called the Drummers that sort of gives themselves these neural uplinks that creates this big hive mind, and they just have this like eternal kind of psychedelic orgy as a hive mind. It's very bizarre. And then there's a group called the Neo-Victorians, which is incredibly cool, where they have all this nanotechnology, but they all dress and act like Victorian British people, and use all this technology to preserve their integrity as a community. It's really, really interesting stuff, but it's hard to form a society like that when you have this kind of acid bath of atomizing modernity here. But if you can form a community like that, you can actually extract concessions from the wider world in many cases. McDonald's has a
Mm,
fillet of fish because there were enough Catholics that wouldn't eat meat on Fridays.
right.
There's elevators in areas with heavily Jewish populations that on the Sabbath will stop on every single floor because as an observant Jew, you can't push an electronic button on the Sabbath. Um,
Oh, right.
these are things that the outside world would regard, that the world in general would regard as irrational, but if your community sticks to them, you can extract those concessions. There's another example that someone gave me that there's a show on Netflix called Altered Carbon where there's a kind of memory stick that people have in their skulls, and you can use it to kind of send your thoughts or your sense perceptions as like files, as like digital files to other people. So you can just look at something and then kind of send someone a video file of it, and people use it for work and things like that. But in the universe of this show, the Catholic Church has a hard prohibition that you're not allowed to transfer the sticks from one body to another. So you can use it as kind of a communication device or like a recording device, but you can't, take it out of your skull when you decide you don't like this body anymore and put it in a new, vat grown body that you've had made. Like that's
Interesting.
where they
Okay.
find, and the company actually had to build that functionality into the technology. They had to say like,
Oh, interesting.
okay, you can buy the Catholic model of the brain stick or whatever, and it comes with this hard lock that it can't be transferred between bodies.
Oh my God. Okay, so yeah, I actually have a couple thoughts on that. We're moving toward the optimism. I wanted to do a little bit more doom, but we'll go back to it. But one thing I'm finding amongst my peers is like we're constant, like even just normal parents in my neighborhood who are parents at the school where my kids go to school. We're constantly talking about technology and where we're drawing the lines, like amongst ourselves, and they're just like regular people who are like, I don't want my kid to have a phone. We have to figure out how to navigate this. Like we have to figure out how they get to go to their friend's house on their bike and how they communicate with me once they get there to make sure that they're there and these kinds of things. And like we're constantly having these conversations. I mean, just yesterday, my daughter rode her bike over to a friend's house, and I said, when you get there, you need to just tell her mom to text me that you're either staying there or you're coming back here. And it's like the same as having a home phone. You got to ask the mom to do it, but she does it. And instead, it's a slippery slope because it would be much easier for me to say, let me just give my kid the phone because then I'll constantly know that she's safe because I'll know where she is because I'll be able to communicate. But you give up so much by giving into that. And so we're like, a lot of people are navigating that. I'm also really hopeful that the Catholic Church does develop a set of norms or rules. I'm really thinking that Pope Leo is on the trajectory to do so. And like if he did, observant Catholics would follow it.
Yeah, that seems to be a big reason he chose the name. He seems to be gearing up to do kind of a big AI encyclical
I
that can
think
hopefully
that
be
might, yeah,
sort of to digital technology what Humana Vitae was to reproductive technology.
totally, totally. And I think I'm hopeful that like there's not many sources of authority, moral authority in the world left, but like if the Pope does come out with this encyclical and put some real laws around it, I think it would be a game changer for just having some sort of like North Star on these questions.
Yeah, what I'm really hoping to get from that is, at minimum, just kind of a very clear, unambiguous declaration that there's something unique about humanity and human consciousness. Because I think there's this idea kind of among sort of the Silicon Valley, like AI messianists or whatever, that we're in the process of birthing some kind of godlike creature, and that perhaps even our human existence just led up to this point. Like our purpose was just to give birth to this vast cosmic AI intelligence that will surpass us so greatly in every way, and that if we want to survive as humans, we just have to meld with that in some sense to like boost our cognitive capacity and make us all capable of richer, more full life or whatever. But you know, but that like kind of raises all these questions. Like there's the like kind of the hard problem of consciousness and philosophy where no one really knows what it even is. Like it's possible to conceive of people who act the same way we all do, but just have no self, like no internal monologue or self-consciousness. Like you could imagine pain working as a mechanism without me feeling hurt. You could just have a biological mechanism where when I touch a hot stove, I pull my hand back. Like I don't need to feel pain. I don't need to feel sad. You could just have a mechanism that makes me react negatively to being excluded from a group or something.
Right.
So we don't actually fully know what consciousness is, and it's by no means clear that it could just be some kind of emergent property of information processing the way that the AI guys sometimes seem to think it is. But there's always that kind of Turing test argument, which is just that, it is all just information processing. Like some of it runs on carbon and some of it runs on silicon, but it's all basically the same thing. And if the computer can convince you it's thinking, who are you to say it isn't? And we've already seen like it's scary because we're at such an early stage of these chatbots and everything, and so many people are just getting one-shotted by these things.
Believable. I mean, you wanted to go back to that conversation about the the parents who sort of resurrected their dead son and talked to him and then
Yeah,
did an interview with him.
it's really dark. I mean, I think it's a manifestation of this broader trend where we're starting to live in a transhuman society, just in the sense that all of the creatures, all of the entities with which you converse on a daily basis may or may not be human. And as if a significant portion of the interactions you have are online, you'll have no way of knowing that.
Right.
You're going to have to be performing your own Turing tests like hundreds of times a day, and you're going to fail some of the time. And
Right.
there's already kind of a move toward giving people AI assistants that will kind of impersonate them, or even if they don't impersonate them, just kind of act on their behalf and, call the dentist's office and like speak and just say like, hey, I'd like an appointment for 2 p.m. for, my boss, Grayson, right? And
Yeah.
it's just my AI assistant. Or it could even call and say like, hi, it's Grayson in my
Yeah.
voice. I want an appointment for 2 p.m.
Right.
And if we don't have like a really robust sense of what makes humanity unique, like if we don't have some kind of sense of just human chauvinism, even,
Right.
we're toast. Like there's very quickly just going to be no sense that there's a difference between these between machine intelligence and human intelligence, and you're already seeing that with people like falling in love with these things and thinking that they're that they're real. And it's like, yeah, maybe many of these people are like mentally ill and or very lonely and confused and sad, which our society seems really good at producing people like that.
Right. Well, I mean, it's like it's almost like a weakened immune system, you know, where like the people are already so weakened by the advancement of all these other things that make corporations profitable, getting them sick, getting them addicted, you know, getting them hating themselves, getting them lonely, getting them atomized. All of that stuff is easy to sell product. And so then you have all of these extremely sick, atomized, lonely individuals, and then this thing comes out. It's so bleak, but like as a solution to somebody who's lonely and needs somebody to talk to, or in the case of these parents, which is even more bleak and even more like there's a lot of spiritual and moral questions that arise. Like, you know, how do you not become attached to a facsimile of your dead son
Yeah.
whom you miss dearly, who died sadly and tragically too young? Like people get attached to like even various divination technologies that like kind of help them like talk to the other side or get some sort of message across. But now you have this like thing that kind of looks almost and feels like your son. How do you not get completely attached to that?
Yeah. Well, this could lead to some really weird places. There's one of the books that I cite in my book is by it's called From Transgender to Transhuman by Martine Rothblatt, who's a male to female transgender and one of the inventors of Sirius satellite radio, interestingly.
Okay. Okay.
Um, but Rothblatt has this whole argument. I mean, that it's kind of implicit in the title of the book, but basically the idea that transgenderism is sort of a halfway house on the way to full transhumanism, that the ultimate ideal is kind of a full freedom of form, as the term Rothblatt uses, similar to what you'd have in a video game where you can just design your own avatar from the ground up,
Yep.
and then kind of port your consciousness into that in some way. And that can be, you know, in virtual reality or through some kind of vat grown body or something. Um, but yeah, one of the predictions Rothblatt has is like, well, if you have an AI construct of yourself that you've been interacting with and that you've delegated to perform tasks as you, and then you die, and your family keeps talking to it and it keeps doing a lot of the same work you were doing, who's to say it's not you?
Right.
You know, why is existence in virtual reality more valid or less valid than existence in meat space? So maybe we should just have this AI like talk to an expert, of course, right? And the expert can certify if the AI is good enough.
And then the expert
And
certification
and
part of it
then now
too.
that now your birth certificate gets transferred over to this thing and it can continue your life as you, the legal person. Um,
Well,
and
I
you know,
like
maybe find love again. Who knows?
well, so I mean, I like this is why I put a lot of hope in like some sort of encyclical, which is like, so I was looking into the like, do you know the Wachowski brothers who are now the Wachowski
Yeah,
sisters?
yeah.
They went to my grade school, small grade school in Chicago, but anyways, they're older than me. But I learned that they actually had very, very intelligent guys, you know, extreme tail end of the spectrum, I think, intelligence, and then had some sort of like kind of got like one-shotted by like weird sex fetish culture in LA.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the origin story of like becoming transgender. And I think like
Many such
fundamentally
cases.
what I'm seeing is there's like an underlying completely amoral or immoral disorder that is behind a lot of these things. So
Well, I think
like
a
it's
lot of
a
that too is just the medium being the message. Like the more time you spend in kind of virtual reality interacting as a discarnate being, the less you're going to view your own body as a key kind of fixed part of your own identity.
right, right.
You know, like if you can be anyone online, why shouldn't you be able to be anyone?
Yes.
Why, you know, you start to resent the limitations of your own body.
But then, yeah, and then I mean, even things like if we want to think about a couple of, I want to talk a little bit about like a couple of horrific examples from the book. But even if you think of something like artificial wombs, like there's an immoral impulse there, right? Which is that like I, as a woman, should not be expected to carry a child, that's a burden instead of a privilege, and that I have no responsibility to like offer my body as like the best place for this offspring to gestate. Instead, like I'm entitled to this product, no matter the consequences for the infant. And so there's like these immoral impulses that get like embodied it or made possible through the technology.
Well, I think at the root of that, and this is why, I end up writing a lot about women's issues in this book. I always used to, I had my old workplace. I would talk about all this bioethical stuff, and it would always come back to reproductive issues, of course.
Yeah,
And some of the women
totally.
would get mad, and I would always say I'm the most pro woman. I'm the most pro woman in this
Yes.
office, including all the women, uh,
Well, and
which
pro
won me a
infant.
lot of
Like,
friends.
yeah, well, yeah, I know. I'm always like, can you think of the infants? Like, they're actual people. Like, let's
Yeah,
care about them. But
but it's
anyways,
yeah. I mean, at kind of the heart of transhumanism is this retreat from an idea of embodied human nature, as kind of what we are and who we are and the kind of beings we should attempt to flourish as, with the flourishing proper to that type of being. This is my like rigmarole. And in the place of that, you just have the will, or the individual desire being kind of deified or placed in this central area. And I think that really explains a lot of the reproductive stuff, even just, going from abortion and then, IVF and artificial wombs and surrogacy and all this other stuff. But at the heart of it is this idea that you can't derive duties from biology. That what is central is your will. Like the fact that your body is currently gestating a child does not equate to some kind of irrevocable duty on your part that the state
right,
could enforce and punish you for uh, being remiss in fulfilling. Like it's your will, and you can rescind that permission at any time.
right,
And you're in fact entitled to medical assistance in rescinding that permission.
right, right. Yeah,
It's just
I
it's
mean,
just a
and
very strange way of viewing human beings, like that your free floating will is what you really are, and everything else about you is just this cruel Darwinian accident that uh,
yes, I mean, I've had
tells
this
you nothing
argument.
about who you are or what you ought to do or how you ought to live.
Right. I mean, I've had this argument about surrogacy. I've also had this argument about like even something as simple as daycare, putting your infant in daycare at like, 6 weeks or whatever. People have said the counter argument to me. I'm like, your infant needs you. You have a duty to your infant. I mean, like you had the baby. You made the choice to have a baby. So you have a duty to that human who's like very, very dependent on you. And then I've had people say back to me like, "Well, what if the mom doesn't want to be home with the baby?" I'm like, "Well, it's not really about her individual will at this point. Now you're in an interdependent dyad, and you owe this baby some basic measure of care." And I know people hate that argument because they're again everybody and like it's feminist now to just have universal basic libertarianism no matter what the impact on infants is, but like I'm just like, well, somebody think of the infants.
Yeah, people get defensive about their thing, and this is why, like, I'm a little black pilled about uh political solution across the board. Like, I'm glad that there have been some victories for the right in kind of banning child sex changes, and there's some movement toward restricting phones and social media for minors. But we're never going to get too far because you just run into this, libertarian brained obsession with individual autonomy and choice. And, yeah, the liberals and conservatives, basically have the same anthropology in this sense,
Yes.
where, and there's kind of several examples, like there's no movement to restrict sex changes for adults, really. Which there could be. I mean, I think that
Right.
it's
Or some
perfectly in
kind of
line
like,
with with like a teleological view of medical ethics that aims at human flourishing as, we can understand it, like we know what a healthy human is, and when
right.
the body is broken or sick, we restore it to what a healthy human is. The idea that you'd take bodily functions or bodily appendages of mine that are working fine and remove them or disrupt them or harm them in some way in accordance with my desires is insane and a totally uh, illegitimate application of medicine, and should
Right. Or
absolutely
even
be
if you look
illegal.
at like the Wachowski sisters or whatever, and you like did some sort of psychological analysis leading up to it, and like, oh, this is actually just like a kind of extreme sex fetish going on. like this, we shouldn't enable this further.
Well, there's one of the essays I cite in the book is by a trans writer named Andrea Long Chu, who also like wrote a whole essay admitting that he became trans because he got into sissy porn, which is
Yeah.
crazy. But he has this essay called My New Vagina Won't Make Me Happy," where he basically says like, I didn't become suicidal until I started my transition. Um, and there's no guarantee that getting this new set of genitalia will make me happy, but that shouldn't matter because I want it. And there should be no restriction on what I can have because of what someone else thinks of my happiness. Like the line that was most chilling there, and maybe we can end with this because we're coming up on an hour, is
Yeah.
that happiness and desire are independent agents. And I really kind of fixated on that from a religious standpoint, because I think that if you view happiness and desire as independent agents, like if you reach a point where your desire is pointed in the exact opposite direction of the thing that will make you happy, and you just keep choosing that forever, that's called hell.
Right. That's a perfect point to end on. I was going to ask you about God, but that's a pithy way to describe it. Thank you so much. I want to just briefly say Grayson is going to be at this event talking about his book that I'm hosting with the Savage Collective in right outside of Pittsburgh, November 7th and 8th. It's the Savage Collective is actually named after this line from Brave New World. Savages, those who defy the progress, live on squalid reservations where they're gawked at by curious transhumans. They're like, we're the savages, and they're like embracing being the savages. So it's a perfect dovetail to your book. And then we'll have Joe Allen there too, who also wrote a book on transhumanism. So it'll be like the transhumanism conference, but we'll see you there. Thank you for coming on. And yeah, this was great.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Have a good one.